Your miracle will happen in 5 minutes. My beloved one, your miracle will happen in just 5 minutes if you will listen to me carefully and understand the meaning of my words. My child, I know your heart longs for miracles in your life. You want a miracle in various aspects of your life. But why don't you always get a miracle? It is not because I withhold my hand, nor is it because I do not hear your desperate cries in the night. It is not a test of your worthiness. For in my eyes, you are infinitely precious, a jewel of my creation. The barrier is not my reluctance, but a fundamental misalignment between your plea and your perception. You stand before a door, pounding upon it with all your might, weeping that it is locked, all the while unaware that it opens inward, not outward, and that you are leaning against it with the full weight of your being, preventing it from moving even an inch. The miracle of provision. You ask for a miracle of provision, for the sudden influx of resources to solve your mounting debts. Yet you clutch your last coin in a fist of fear, your heart closed to the generosity I place before you. A neighbor needs a meal, and you turn away thinking your own pantry too bare to share. In that very act of sharing, the miracle of multiplication begins. You pray for a job, for a door of opportunity to swing wide, but you refuse to update your skills, to send out one more application, to rise an hour earlier and seek with renewed vigor, believing the effort is pointless. Do you not see? My miracle is woven into the very fabric of your obedience to move your feet. I do not drop manna from heaven onto a sleeping camp. I provide it for those who are awake and gathering. True miracles are often quiet. Your concept of a miracle is so often a spectacle, a breaking of my natural laws in a way that is undeniable and instant. You want the parted sea, the sun standing still, the water turned to wine. And I have done these things, but my most profound miracles are quieter, slower, and far more powerful. They are the miracle of a hardened heart softening over time, the miracle of a seed breaking its shell underground long before the green shoot ever sees the sun, the miracle of forgiveness blooming in a place where only bitterness could grow. You are watching the clock, demanding a spectacle at 3:05, while I am orchestrating a symphony that requires the precise timing of every instrument, some of which have not yet even been tuned. Your 5 minutes are not a countdown to a fireworks display. They are the moment you finally choose to step into the current of my will, where the flow of my power can immediately carry you. The miracle of healing. You ask for a miracle in your body, for healing to course through your veins and restore your strength. You pray with fervor, yet you fill the temple of your body with worry that is a poison, with bitterness that is a cancer to your soul, with foods that weaken and habits that destroy. You ask me to repair the vessel while you insist on striking it against the rocks of anxiety and self-neglect. The miracle of healing begins with a miracle of peace. It begins when you, right now, in this very minute, choose to release the anxiety that chokes your faith. That release is the first domino to fall. When you surrender the illness to me, not with resignation, but with trust, you create a space within you, a wholly vacant lot where my healing power can begin to build. It is not always an instantaneous flash. Sometimes it is the slow, steady, miraculous rebuilding of a cell, then a tissue, then an organ, as your spirit aligns with the truth that you are already whole in my sight. The miracle of reconciliation. In your relationships, you beg for a miracle of reconciliation, for the broken bridge to be mended. You pray for the other heart to change, to see the error, to apologize, to return. But my miracle often starts not with them, but with you. It starts in the 5 minutes you decide to dismantle the altar of your own righteousness. It begins when you let go of the detailed record of wounds you have kept, when you exchange your demand for justice for my gift of mercy. You want me to perform surgery on their heart while yours is shielded by pride and protected by pain. Open your own heart first. Forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve the freedom that forgiveness brings. This act of will, this choice to unclench the fist of your grievance, is the most powerful miracle-working force in the universe. It changes the spiritual atmosphere around you instantly. It may not change them today, but it will change you. And that, my child, is the primary miracle I am always working towards. The miracle of connection. You feel abandoned in your loneliness and you plead for a miracle of companionship, for a friend, a partner, a community. You look at the empty spaces around your table and your heart aches. But I see you scrolling through images of others' lives, comparing your solitude to their gatherings and sinking deeper into the isolation of your own making. The miracle of connection is waiting for you to look up from the screen and see the world I have placed you in. It is in the 5 minutes you choose to walk to the park instead of pacing your living room. It is in the smile you offer the grocery clerk, the conversation you start with the person next to you in line, the courage to say yes to an invitation you would normally decline. I am constantly placing people in your path, but your gaze is downcast, focused on the shadow of your lack, and you step right over the opportunities one lay before you. Community is not found. It is built one brick of courageous interaction at a time. Start laying those bricks now. The miracle of purpose. You desire a miracle of purpose, to feel that your life has meaning, that you are not merely drifting. You cry out for a sign, a clear direction, a roadmap. But you stand at the crossroads waiting for a billboard to light up with instructions while I have given you a compass that is always active. Your passions, your skills, the quiet nudges of your spirit that urge you toward a certain path. The miracle of direction is granted to those who are already moving. Take one step, any step, in the direction that feels most aligned with the love I have placed within you. Start that project. Volunteer for that course. Enroll in that class. As you move, I adjust your course. As you step out in faith, even a trembling faith, the path is illuminated just enough for the next step and the next. Your 5 minutes of decision to act, however small the action, is the spark that ignites the engine of destiny. The fortress of self-reliance. The greatest blockage to your miracle is the fortress of self-reliance you have spent a lifetime building. You pray for me to act, but then you spend all your energy devising your own solutions, manipulating outcomes, and trying to force doors that I have not opened. You come to me with your blueprint and ask me to bless it, rather than coming to me with a blank page and asking for my design. You are like a child who brings her father a tangled mess of string and demands he make it into a beautiful necklace, all the while refusing to let go of the knot she herself has tied. My miracle requires your surrender. It requires you to release the tangled mess into my hands and trust that my artistry can create something far more magnificent than you could ever imagine. This surrender is not passivity. It is the most active state of faith. It is engaging every particle of your being in the trust that I am who I say I am. The power of your words. And what of your words? You pray for a miracle, but then you speak defeat, lack, and failure over your situation. You declare with your mouth the very opposite of what you claim to believe in your heart. Your words are not merely sounds. They are creative forces. You are constantly building your world with the timber of your language. When you say, I'll never get out of this, you are constructing a prison. When you say, this is impossible, you are laying an immovable stone across your own path. The miracle begins in your mouth. In the next 5 minutes, you have a choice. You can continue to narrate the problem, or you can begin to declare the solution even before you see it. Speak my promises. Speak gratitude for the miracle that is already on its way. Speak hope. Speak life. This is not positive thinking. This is supernatural agreement. It is using the authority I have given you to call forth those things which are not as though they were, just as I do. Divine timing. My timing is perfect, but it is not your timing. You live within the linear confines of seconds, minutes, and hours, and you grow impatient when my schedule does not conform to your wristwatch. I inhabit eternity. I see the end from the beginning. I know the perfect moment for the intersection of 1,000 different variables, people, circumstances, events, that must converge for your greatest good and for my greatest glory. The 5 minutes I speak of is not a measure of earthly time, but a quantum shift in your spirit. It is the moment you finally yield, finally believe, finally obey, finally see. In that instant, the spiritual reality that has always been true, your victory, your provision, your healing, manifests in the natural realm. The delay is never in my delivery system. It is in the reception of your heart. Lessons from biblical miracles. You ask of the times when the sea was rolled back like a scroll, when the sun paused its fiery course across the sky, when the walls of a mighty city fell flat at the sound of a shout. You look upon these events recorded in your scriptures, and you see the spectacle, the awesome, undeniable power. But my child, you see only the eruption of the volcano, not the millennia of pressure and formation that preceded it. You hear the symphony's final crashing chord and believe it to be the entire piece of music. These moments were not isolated acts of power for power's sake. They were the perfect, inevitable culmination of a process, the moment when the faith that had been forged in the hidden fires of obedience and patience finally intersected with my perfect will. The miracle was not the event itself, but the perfect timing of it. Moses and the Red Sea. Consider the man Moses standing on the banks of the Red Sea. The water lay before him, a vast and impossible barrier. Behind him thundered the chariots of a Pharaoh who had finally fully hardened his heart against me. The people cried out in terror, not in faith. They saw only two certain deaths, drowning or the spay. They had seen the plagues. They had walked out of Egypt laden with gold. Yet their hearts still lived in the slavery of faith. Moses too felt that human terror. But in that moment, his years of preparation clicked into place. 40 years in the palace learning the ways of power. Then 40 years in the wilderness herding stubborn sheep, learning the ways of humility and listening. In the silence of the desert, he learned to hear my voice above the bleating of the flock and the whispers of his own failure. So on that bank, with chaos screaming behind him and impossibility before him, he did not cry out in panic. He had been prepared. He cried out to me, yes, but then he listened. And my instruction was not a complex strategy. It was a single, seemingly absurd command. Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. The miracle happened not when the water parted, but the moment Moses chose to lift his staff. That was the perfect time, a moment earlier, and the people would have attributed it to a natural tide or a strange wind, their faith untested and therefore unstrengthened. A moment later, and the chariots would have been upon them, and faith would have been swallowed by despair. The perfect time was the precise nanosecond when human obedience, however trembling, activated my divine command. The sea did not part because of the staff. It parted because of the faith that lifted it. The years of preparation, the failed attempts in his own strength, the quiet waiting. It was all for that one obedient gesture. The miracle was the fruit, and obedience was the root from which it sprang. Joshua and the walls of Jericho. Think of my servant Joshua before the walls of Jericho. To the natural mind, it was a most foolish military strategy ever conceived. Marching, silence, shouting, priests with trumpets. What were the battering rams, the siege towers, the tunnels? For 6 days they marched in a silent procession, a parade of seeming futility. Can you imagine the taunts from the walls, the doubt rising in the hearts of the soldiers, the temptation in Joshua's own mind to abandon this bizarre plan and try something more reasonable? Each day of silent obedience was a layer of faith being laid down. Each day they overcame doubt, ridicule, and impatience. They were not just walking around the city. They were walking in obedience, and with every step, they were dismantling the fortress of their own self-reliance. The perfect time for the miracle was not on the first day when enthusiasm was high. It was not on the third day when doubt might have begun to creep in. It was on the seventh day, after the pattern of obedience had been established, after the people had learned to trust a command that made no logical sense. The walls fell at the appointed shout because the shout was the final expression of faith that had been built brick by brick over 6 days of silent submission. The miracle was the collapse of stone, but the greater miracle was the construction of a people's trust. The timing was perfect because their faith was finally ready to receive the victory without crediting their own strength or wisdom. The victory was unmistakably mine, the sun standing still. And what of the sun standing still over Judah? You marvel at the celestial mechanics, the suspension of the natural order. But see the context. Joshua was in the midst of defending a promise I had. He was fighting a battle of obedience, fulfilling a covenant. He was not pursuing personal glory or expansion of his kingdom. He was acting as my instrument of justice. His prayer, "O sun, stand still over Gibeon, O moon, over the valley of Ijah," was not a presumptuous demand for a sign. It was a plea for the continuation of a victory that was already in motion according to God. He was not asking for the battle to be won. He was asking for more time to complete the work of winning. The perfect time for this miracle was not at the beginning of the battle to ensure a quick win, nor at the end to provide a dramatic finale. It was in the midst of the fray when the obedience was already being walked out, when the victory was already being secured, but human limitation, the setting of the sun, threatened to leave the work unfinished. I honored that prayer because it was a prayer of alignment. Joshua was not asking for his will to be done. He was asking for my will to be fully accomplished. He was so immersed in the execution of my command that his desire was solely for its completion. The miracle was granted in that perfect moment of synergistic purpose. His will was utterly dissolved into mine. The widow of Zarephath. Consider the widow of Zarephath. Her miracle was a handful of flour and a little oil that did not run out. A small, quiet miracle happening in the obscurity of a famine-struck land. The prophet Elijah came to her and asked for water, and then for bread. She had reached the end of herself. She was gathering sticks for a final meal for herself and her son, after which they expected to die. Her resources were gone. Her hope was gone. The perfect time for the miracle was the moment she chose to make a cake for the prophet first. It was the moment she prioritized obedience to my words spoken through Elijah over her own certain death. It was an act of insane faith. She trusted the word of a stranger who spoke in my name over the evidence of her empty jar and jug. The miracle did not happen when Elijah spoke the promise. It happened when she poured out the last of her oil and flour to make a cake for him. The substance multiplied in the pouring, not in the hoarding. The timing was perfect because it required her absolute surrender. There was no backup plan. She had to act as if the promise was true before there was any physical evidence that it was. Her obedience created the vessel into which my endless provision could be poured. A day earlier, she might have had a hidden reserve, a shred of self-reliance left. A day later, and she and her son would have been gone. The perfect time was that precise point of total yieldedness. Jesus at the wedding in Cana. And then there was my son Jesus, the perfect embodiment of my will and timing. Every miracle he performed was a lesson in divine chronology. At the wedding in Cana, His mother told him the wine had run out. His initial response was, "My hour has not yet come." He was not referring to the clock on the wall. He was speaking of the unveiling of his glory, the beginning of the journey that would lead to the cross. The perfect time for that first miracle was not when the party started, but when the world's solution had utterly failed, creating a backdrop of lack against which my abundance could shine. It was when his mother, in beautiful faith, turned to the servants and said, "Do whatever he tells you." Their obedience, filling the jars with water, drawing some out, taking it to the master of the banquet, was the conduit. The miracle happened in the moment of their unquestioning action. The timing was perfect because it served a higher purpose than merely saving a social embarrassment. It served to reveal his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him.